Hello, and welcome to the Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, today's guest on the podcast is Laure Mandin. He is the founder of Graphos and the author of the book, I Need That. He's an expert on product marketing and the introduction of new products into the marketplace. I especially liked our conversation when we were talking about new products that need to be at least 10 times better than existing products before you sort of introduce them to the marketplace, if you want success.
Yeah, sounds interesting, Bela. I'm interested to hear Laure's insights on innovation. And as a plus, he's Canadian, and it's great to have a Canadian on the podcast. So without further ado, let's get right to today's interview.
Laure, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Bela. Just great talking to you briefly before you hit record about some of the things we can talk about. And I've been listening to your back episodes and really keen on contributing to what you're building there.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So let me ask you a question. If you're at a social engagement, a non-work related social engagement, or better yet, you're at an Edmonton's Oiler hockey game and you're next to someone, and during intermission, after you go through the pleasantries of introducing each other, they say to you, "Oh, so nice to meet you, Laure. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
The first thing I tell them is I run a product launch agency where I help innovators, entrepreneurs take new products to market. And the biggest goal that I have with those people is to de-risk what it is they're launching. So we create go-to-market roadmaps for our clients and help them to have their own, basically a guidebook of how they're going to take this specific product to market, the challenges they're likely to face, how they're going to, the tactics they can use to balance and mitigate those challenges, and the steps they need to take to maximize their likelihood of success.
Yeah. So that is of great interest to our listeners. Many of our listeners are entrepreneurs who have started companies, or in the process of starting companies, or thinking about starting companies. Mm-hmm. And in order to survive, they all need to introduce some kind of product or service to generate revenue. So when people think about introducing a product to the marketplace, what are like the top three things that most people get incorrect?
The top three things, definitely the first one, 100% every time, is that they are going to underestimate how hard it's going to be. They're going to overestimate, probably number two, how easy it's going to be to have people adopt their product, and underestimate how hard it's going to be to get there. And the third thing is probably underestimating the time and budget it's going to take to get this product to market successfully. So they're not going to give themselves enough runway. Their expectations that they're going to build with themselves, with their peers, with their team, with their investors are all going to be probably based on best case. Even if they think they're shooting worst case, it's going to be not worst case. It's going to be best case scenarios. So one of the things that I tell people, and I talk about in the book that I just released, it's called I Need That, is the 10X reality, is making a product twice as good as whatever is out there, which is what most people think is the benchmark. It sounds like that's amazing, but that's actually a death sentence for the product, because the math of human psychology demands it be 10 times better, or it's not going to be worth the pain of change. Because innovators, we were talking about basically those beliefs, those preconceived notions you have, it's part of the planning fallacy. We tend to make choices that are driven by unrealistic optimism instead of objectively thinking about the likely outcomes. We overstate the potential gains, and we underestimate the costs and downsides that we face in taking a product to market. So the reason I say 10 times is consumers by default tend to overvalue what they already have, their status quo, by at least 3 times. They're skeptical about any new product's performance. They're generally unable to see the need for something new. What they've got a workaround, they've got a way of doing it, they get by and it works. They're satisfied with their existing solution, and they're predisposed to seeing what they already own, have invested in, learned to use, and can pull out of their pocket and do without a learning curve as their happy status quo. And then on the other side of that, the innovators, the entrepreneurs and product makers overvalue their innovation's benefits by at least 3 times. So they're convinced that the innovation is going to be amazing to everybody who hears or sees it. Predisposed to seeing a clear and obvious need for the product. So they've got the predisposition is the opposite of what the consumer's got, or the buyer if they're B2B. Deeply dissatisfied. They're very unhappy with the existing solutions, to the extent that they've gone and taken, spent thousands of hours or years of their life, all their life savings, their investors' money, whatever resources they've taken and put into this. They feel it's absolutely worth putting all of that into. That's how deeply dissatisfied they are with the existing solutions, and they're set on seeing their product as the clear new benchmark. And no one else is at that point. So because of that 3 times on one side and the 3 times in the other direction on the other side, you get this 9 times imbalance. And in order to not end up at a stalemate, you've got to be one more better. You've got to be 10 times better. So that's the first thing that I think. And when you start thinking about it that way, I think it ups your bar, which is very important, that you have to recognize that really successful new products, if you're talking about the iPhone, it wasn't just marginally better than the BlackBerry or the Palm Trio. It blew it out of the water. Similarly, if you're going to come to market with a new electric car, others tried. The reason Tesla succeeded after 17 years, mind you, they didn't make a slightly better electric car. They basically beat the status quo at every measuring point that was significant, or almost everyone. We still have some issues in cold weather, like places where I live, but in order to do that, it had to be so much better. And obviously other factors like having infrastructure in place. But the reality is that most failed products are not bad products. They're often great ideas. They just weren't quite great enough to push them over the edge to get people to say, I need that.
Yeah. Very well said. I couldn't agree with you more. And 2 things really struck me. One, your notion of 10 times better. And one of the reasons that I always, the way I think about that is, if you're 20 or 30% better, your competition, i.e. the product your potential customers already using, they already have the next version in the pipeline that's going to be coming out within the next 6 months or so. And that's going to be 20% better than their existing product. So you can't match it. You got to be right. And getting people to change behavior, to change buying patterns is really challenging. The other thing that really struck me that you said, and having been in the venture capital business for a number of years and seen many companies who kept saying, oh, we're 3 months away from greatness, and for the last 4 years, they've been 3 months away from greatness. And, oh yeah, this next change we're going to make to the product is going to really kick it up. And it always takes longer. Even if your product is 10 times better, it takes longer to get customers to buy it, to adopt it. So what are the types of things that an entrepreneur can do to overcome these obstacles?
One of them, as I said, is making sure your product is that much better, and making sure that you've done the amount of validation that you need to make as well. Because I think that when you talk about the mistakes that most entrepreneurs make, is they very often, and even big companies, big brands will do this. Their validation methods won't be scientific enough. They won't really be a measure of how consumers think in general, how their market, how a large enough piece of that market thinks, in order to change those habits, to break with the status quo and buy this new product, to make those behavioral changes and put out the money, take all the risks. So with validation, it's really important that you're committing to the right directions, because the mistakes you make early on, they tend to stick with you, and they get multiplied when you scale. When you 10x your sales, every functionality glitch, every cost factor, every manufacturing defect, every customer support inefficiency gets 10 times better too. Bigger rather, not better, the opposite. And improvements also scale and pay dividends. So every effort that you put into making the product and your practices and processes and everything about it better pay big dividends as you're making things better and making more of it. So every optimization you put into it pays off in multiples when you're scaling. And yet most founders are afraid of validation, And when you get into their heads and you think about the fallacy that they face and what got them to where they are, there's a few big reasons why founders and these innovators are afraid of validation, because they're already emotionally invested and they've embedded success into their future vision. I talk in the book about the coveted condition, and there really is, we spend almost half of our waking hours daydreaming and fantasizing and visualizing things that we'd rather be doing than what we're doing. And it comes very easy to our brain. Our rational brain, our neocortex is bad at thinking. It's only 2% of our body weight by mass, but yet it takes 20% of our energy. But daydreaming and thinking about happier things comes easily. So if you're in a boring class with a boring professor, a boring subject matter, what happens really easily, and you can do it in your sleep, is going into thoughts about things you'd rather be doing that come really easily with very little precious energy resources being used. So they've been dreaming about that success like an expectant parent, and their vision is so clear in their mind. And challenging that belief in that vision, it's like asking an expectant parent if they're qualified for all the jobs and tasks of parenthood, if they really should have a baby. It's just, they're that far along that challenging it it's one of the hardest things that they can do. They feel that doing proper validation won't be the people who you're running the validation tests on won't see the vision. The old Steve Jobs thing of, people don't know what they want until we show it to them is kind of that was probably, that cost innovators billions of dollars, because now, that they will cling to that. The greatest visionary of our times said that I don't have to do validation testing. No, he said he doesn't have to because he could afford it, and he'd failed massively, enough times in his life.
That's right.
So nobody wants validation to take away their dream. They'd sort of rather fail, which is not a healthy mind setting, considering the odds. Like 70 to 95% of new innovations fail. And that's like, if you go to Vegas and you bet on the roulette wheel, most of the betting is just under 50%. So having the odds that much against you, you'd get kicked out of Vegas for trying to get people to bet on the kind of odds that entrepreneurs are taking on when they go and take a product to market.
Right.
So,
So how can a sort of a small to medium-sized company, what's an effective and efficient way for them to do validation of a product they're thinking about launching?
Well, it's something you can it can be done yourself. The most important thing is not to be running your validation tests on friends and family.
Right.
And I talk about that in detail in the book about why that's a terrible idea. Your friends and family, there's a really good book called The Mom Test, and it's saying, you don't ask your mom because she will lie to you and tell you your product is great. Well, your friends and family are even worse because you choose them and they choose to be with you and they want to stay your friends. Your mom is going to be your mom no matter what. So the last people on earth that you want to talk to is your friends and family, or maybe your employees that are worried about consequences if they don't say that it's a brilliant idea. So you have to find people who reflect your ideal buyers. And very often innovators will say, well, I don't know where to find those people. I've got to go with the ones I know. But if you can't find those people now, it's going to get way harder to find a million of them later. So there are ways you can find these people. And if you can't, there are other techniques you can use. There are a number of platforms where you can run surveys that will find the demographic and interest groups that you need to talk to. You can run one-on-one interviews, and I do that a lot of times for clients. People can do that themselves. It takes a little bit more technique, and kind of the highest level is usually focus groups. I find the surveys and the one-on-one interviews, though, those can give you so much great information. And if you follow the right steps in talking to those people, it's really cost effective compared to not just the cost of failure, but the cost of doing major recalibrations down the road. And generally, if you're going to spend $10,000 or $20,000 doing those types of interviews and testing, those will pay you back, because I've never run any kind of surveys and interviews that didn't give us such good information, that didn't help save bigger costs down the road, that didn't give us insights that help us to make a better product. So doing the real validation work on strangers that match your buyer profile, your ideal buyer profile, that is worth its weight in gold. And it might be a separate podcast episode, but I could, go through the steps and tell your listeners how to do that if you're interested at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when entrepreneurs are in the formulation stage of thinking about a product, what are the types of things they should be doing like really early on in that process?
Well, really early on, if they're thinking about the product, and if they're talking about a physical product, making very, very rough prototypes is a great thing to be doing. And that's become a challenge, because you can create high fidelity prototypes and 3D print them, and they look like something right off a shelf, and that can be a mistake. You're way better off going to your audience, to your test candidates, with something that's made out of paper tubes and duct tape, and having them hold it in their hands and show you how they would use it, and you can watch where they would look for a button, and where it should be knurled for a good grip, and that type of thing. But if you give them something that is too finished and too obvious how to use it, it doesn't give you as much help and insight. So one of the things I recommend is make yourself a really nice rough prototype, and don't worry about it. The people you're testing on it will appreciate that. They'll give you better insights, and just have them narrate to you what they would do in using that prototype in trying to achieve what it is they're doing. So where would you feel is a logical place to turn it? What should it have? What controls should this thing have? What would be the most intuitive? And if they're narrating how they're using it, and then make improvements and go back to them, and also take it to a new set of people, because otherwise what the thing that happens is when you go back, they're going to be familiar with it, and it's going to automatically look like the product got better, even if it didn't, because now they know what it is. It's their second time around, and you get this false sense of having improved it. So go back to the same people, but also take it to some new people, and do the same thing over again and see what they do. And then when you get into the higher fidelity prototypes, you can still go back to the same people and find out if they feel you've got it right. Is this something, is this on the right track? And still you haven't invested too much into it. You're long before making injection molds and doing all the really expensive stuff that comes with manufacturing products.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. So one of the things that I always used to say when I was in the venture capital business is I'd ask people who were getting ready to introduce a new product or talking about a new product, I'd say, do you guys have a user's manual? And if their response was, oh yeah, so we have a 70-page user's manual, I would say, I'm not investing. Right.
Yeah, that's because nobody's going to read that thing.
Right. So,
yeah.
So if it takes 70 pages or even 10 pages to sort of explain how to use your product, I'm thinking of a consumer product.
Yeah.
You're already behind the 8 ball. One of the beautiful things about many devices that we can point at is you can sort of figure out how to use it almost intuitively.
Yes.
Although that's a word that's overused. So do you have some thoughts or suggestions for how people can achieve that kind of goal of not having a user's manual?
Of not having a user's manual. Yeah. I've got a chapter in the book that's called You're Not Apple. And it talks about all of the things that, whenever I ask almost any new prospect about what brands they emulate, what kind of user friendliness and what kind of image they want, Apple's almost always up there, and that's great. But Apple became what it is by being an innovator, by creating things that nobody else had done. And to be an innovator, you can't copy an innovator, because that makes you a follower. So you have to find your own way. And I think really the best way to get to an intuitive product is to break it down to the simplest possible form that it can exist in. And that is counterintuitive to people, to use the opposite of the word intuitive, but it really is when you're developing. It's because you want to make this thing elaborate enough and fancy enough that it looks like it's something that's worth investing in and purchasing. And if it looks too simple, you imagine people are just going to walk right by it and take it for granted. But obviously the opposite is true. And almost with any product that you've ever adopted, you probably didn't, like, if there are some cases where, I'm looking at my control board here for recording that I have for when I do my own podcast. And, that's got a lot of switches and dials and things on there, but the number of them isn't what makes it better. If you could cut those in half at any point and still have the same functionality, it is better. And, the Tesla example is a great one, is how, that has changed the way having just that one tablet other automakers started looking at that and saying, well, good point. Why do we have all these dials and different controls and that all these things that only do one thing sometimes? Like you have
Right.
your whole display cluster, and it's really maybe your speedometer and occasionally your tachometer that you're going to look at. Why do we need this whole dedicated space on the dash to do really one thing for our user? So I think when you find ways to kind of multiply the purposes that a certain switch or dial can do, if you can really simplify the gestures, the actions, the way that these controls are accessed to make them more reflexive to people, make them model, make the way that things occur in nature. So if you know, and that's when we've come a long way toward doing that with the interfaces we have on our devices. Is you know, touch screens, you just basically touch and move and put something where you want to, and we've got this familiarity of interface buttons and things like that. So you can look at an on-off switch and know that's what that is without a word written on it, because you know what that symbol means. So using these common elements are good ways to make a product more useful. And I think just really what it comes down to is how simple can we possibly make this? And then how can we make it even simpler? Because, you know, I think it's got to be iterative to keep on breaking down. It doesn't get to that level, the maximum level of simplicity in a single iteration.
Yeah. Yeah. So in addition to your book, which I want to talk about in a minute here, you have a company, Graphos, that helps companies do these types of things. So let's say I called you up and I said, Laurier, excuse me, I have a new product I'm thinking about introducing, but I want to retain your company to sort of help me through that process, refine the product, etc. Talk to me about that engagement and what that would be like.
Yes. And that's something that we do all the time. Is interestingly, I talk to a lot more entrepreneurs than we end up working with. And that is, I guess I was going to almost say it's not because we're not fussy, but it is kind of is because we are. But also entrepreneurs need to be at a certain stage, and they need to have a certain kind of level of ability, and they need a certain level of budget to be able to work with an agency that's going to do all the stuff that we are going to do. So we're pretty boutique, and I'm working with, you know, a half dozen clients right now. So we don't have a large number of different clients to come through our funnel. So, and on our website, we have a page that's called About Us, and a page is called About You. And our About You page talks about the things that you should value and the things you should be interested in getting out of the relationship to come and work with Graphos product. So, and you know, a few of them are pretty obviously that we are, you know, we provide excellent service. When you send me an email, expect to hear back from me the same day. And that's not just a promise, that's a practice that I've had for my entire 30-year career. Is when people who are my client, especially, ask me a question, I don't leave them wondering if I've taken off and left the country. I'm responsive, and I come back to them very quickly, and so do all the people I work with. So we're all kind of zero inbox and happy about that. But beyond that, I would want to know as much as I can about where you're at with the product, who your market is. And before we started recording, you talked about, you know, if they say everyone, then that's a huge red flag to me, because I've never seen somebody with an everyone market succeed. It just isn't possible to target everyone. And when you're starting out, if you're a startup, unless you're massive and you do have something that's, you know, the biggest breakthrough of our time, even then you're not going to target everyone. You got to target those early adopters, which are, you know, innovators and early adopters, 2 to 3% of the population. Those are the people who are going to take a chance on your product within the segment that already would be your ideal user. So it's a very, very narrow group of people that you should be targeting right off the start. And having that understanding and being okay with that is really important in order to work with an agency and to be able to have an understanding of what it is we're trying to do, which is we're going to be doing some very careful segmentation. We're going to be identifying the personas, the type of person, and who will be our ideal buyer, and then narrowing marketing and the messaging and the positioning so that we're speaking to exactly those very people. And so when they see this product and they learn about it, they're going to know it's made exactly for them. They're going to feel like you made this product just for them. And if your market is bigger in the long run, when you're able to start to scale it, then you build on that and you start to, for one thing, you'll have other people outside of your ideal target market seeing what you've got and wanting it, but also you'll have established a good track record, because only your ideal buyers are going to be the most likely to have great success with the product, and a general everyone market doesn't tend to have that same likelihood of success. And
Right.
they're also going to be a lot more critical. Early adopters are great for, they're expecting, they're eager to be the first on their block to buy something that no one else has, and they're willing to forgive. Like Tesla buyers, I guess, is another good example. Is these people are willing to accept that their product has a higher rate of flaws than any other automaker out there, and still be very proud that they're driving that vehicle, because they're early adopters and because it says something about who they are. So there's a lot more to it than just what they want necessarily out of the product.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. So you recently wrote a book. The title of the book is I Need That. Can you speak a little bit about who the ideal target market is? What type of person should be buying and reading that book?
For sure. And I wrote this book, I talked about this high failure rate, and the fact that a lot of people don't understand how important validation is, and the reasons those things exist together. And so my goal in writing this book was that anybody who I've encountered over the years that was coming out and starting to prepare a product for market, that was thinking about their marketing, and a lot of what I talk about in the book Beyond the Validation is the brain science and psychology and the elements of need that make people say I need that when they see a product. I want people developing a product and it can be a service as well, who are taking their new thing to market, can understand what barriers they've got to get through, and recognizing that the barriers are high and it's going to be tough doesn't mean you're not going to do it. If you don't recognize, if you go off to the Olympics today and you have no idea what you're up against, you're going to get blown away, even if you're the most talented athlete ever at your sport, because you're not ready for it. You don't know how tough it's going to be out there. But if you know the level of competition that you're up against, you know how high your bar has to be raised to medal. That's what gives you a chance. So my goal with this book was to give innovators a fighting chance, to get them to leave that default trajectory to failure, that 70 to 95%. And, those aren't fixed odds. Those are the odds because of the way people typically approach taking your product to market. But if you have a good product, a great product, better yet, and you're following the right steps, if you're understanding the brain science of human beings in general, and specifically of the types of people that you're trying to market to, you're positioning the product in a way that's going to resonate with those people's brains. You're helping them, your audience, to see in their mind what I call the coveted condition, which is not just a desired future state, but it's a long-term desired future state. It's that if you were to take the product away after a year of using it, what would they miss the most? That kind of thing. So it's not just give it to you, you try it, I take it away, and are you sad about that? It's, these people become your users. What has changed in their life? And what kind of changes do I believe this product is going to bring into people's lives? If it's worth developing, it's going to improve people's lives. It's going to turn them into someone better. And I talk about, if you were to buy a Peloton bike and sign up with the subscription, you're not doing that just because you once liked biking and you think you might like it again. You're going to all that trouble and cost because you want more out of this. You want to join a community of supporters who are going to be pushing you on your mission to get healthier and fitter. You're buying it because you have a desired future state in mind that's a fitter, healthier, stronger, better, longer living, contributing more energetic version of the current you. So that's a whole different thing than the cost of purchase. It's something you believe you can stick with because it's different from what you're doing now. So how is this different for your buyers than what that status quo is now? How is it that much better? And what is the dream that they have? I talk about, if you're watching an ad for an F-150 and it's bouncing across all these boulders on a mountainside, nobody does that with their truck. But you have that, this coveted condition you have, is of being, in command of this powerful vehicle that can take you wherever you want to, and make you feel stronger and better, and bring you to where the adventures are, and give you this part of yourself that is lacking right now, but could be there. So it's, how do you, with your product or your service, paint the picture of that desired, long-term desired future state that your buyer has.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. So we've been chatting now for over a half hour, so I want to start wrapping this up. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I talk a lot about in the book about the psychological triggers and the brain science, and I probably should have gotten into that a little bit earlier in the interview if we're going to talk about that, because it's a little bit deep. But essentially, one thing that that's important for people to know, and in the book I have this. It's called Climb, and it's literally called Climb because it's a ladder, and it's customer life improving. Customer life improving mechanisms and benefits. It's the things that your product does, the outcomes, the functional benefits, all the benefits that you get from buying a product. And in the book, I teach people how to look at their product through the eyes of potential buyers, and to understand which of the Climb framework aspects can apply to their products. So we have does it serve functional needs? Does it serve emotional needs, transformative needs, and transcendent needs, which are the really bigger than you ones. And so helping people to identify those, and then find the trigger points for their buyers that are associated with all of these. And even just especially if you have a product that achieves multiple, that serves multiple needs, being able to say, these are the 7 that we serve with this product. For each of those, you have potential campaign messaging that you can create, and potentially different parts of that coveted condition you can target. So I think it's really important that people understand which needs their product serves, and to the extent that they can be very clear about them, that they can create messaging specific to those, and then understanding the trigger points. And again, if you have an understanding of the brain science and how this all works, what happens within those kind of 3 main components of the triune brain, then you're in a really good position, I believe. One of the things I say in the introduction to the book too is, I believe that by the time you're done reading this, you should have no excuse to fail with your product. That doesn't mean your product can't fail, but I believe I cover the potential reasons for it to fail. And if you do, it's probably because you ignored something, and it probably will be along the validation side and not trusting what your validation says and going ahead anyway. But this is something that, if your product needs to be made better, make it better. Do what it takes to make it better, and to understand your buyer before you sell one single unit.
Yeah.
And your chances of succeeding will be much, much greater.
Very nice. Very nice. So give us the title of the book one more time, and where's the best place for people to get it?
I'll hold it up for the people who watch on video. It's got a yellow and red cover, and it's called I Need That. I have to look at my own subtitle. Creating and marketing products people are compelled to buy. And that's really what it is about. It's about creating that need, creating that not just a desire. And I talk a lot in the book about the difference between want and need, because it's really significant. And a need really beyond these existential needs of breathing and eating and drinking and having shelter, everything else that is beyond that is a construct of that buyer's mind. And so when you think you need anything else, no, you want it, but you've turned it into a need, which is really important, because once something is in your mind a need, then you're going to get it. It's become non-negotiable to you in your mind. So how do you get that product to being a non-negotiable, not something where they're comparing with other things? That's the one that they need. And I guess the last thing, if you let me give a plug to where to get it,
yes,
the book is available on Amazon, and it's in 4 different formats. It's in hardcover, paperback, Kindle ebook, and I've got a really exceptional. I believe my audiobook it's recorded by a voice artist that I've worked with for over a decade, and I was just so delighted when I realized he was willing to take on a project this big, because he was a former Disney radio host, and just very, very good read of the book. As I read it, I just was smiling. I couldn't believe how how good a job he did and how well he recognized what I was getting at with my little turns of phrase and that type of thing.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I will make sure all that information is in the show notes. Laure, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. You were wonderful.
Thank you, Bela. I really enjoyed being here and happy to come back anytime. I got lots more stuff to talk about if your listeners give you good feedback. So much appreciated.
Yeah, we will do that. Thank you.
Really interesting interview, Bela. There were a lot of kind of cool perspectives packed into your talk. What were your main takeaways from your conversation with Laure?
So, Mike, my number one takeaway here is ones of caution, and the second half of it is sort of really being honest to yourself about the product. So, entrepreneurs and investors are in love with their product or invention. It's their baby, and to them, it's obvious how everyone should use it. And that's good, and it should be that way. But oftentimes, how you get a customer to love your product is sort of interesting. And I really like the part where we talked about your product needs to be 10 times better than the competition. Because you got to think about this. People are currently using some product or system or service today to fulfill the need that your new product is going to also fulfill. So you got to get people to switch. And getting people to switch is a challenging thing. And I think that's where, if it's 10 times better than the competition, then you'll get people's attention. You'll get them to go through that risk of switching and also the learning that's going to be involved in switching products. And, it sort of it reminds me about this notion of if your product is only 10 or 15% better, the competition's probably already working on the next generation of their product, which is going to be incrementally better than their existing one, which is 10 or 15% better. So you gotta come out with something that's really gonna, leapfrog over the competition. The other thing I'll say is there's some products that are sort of mission critical and other products that are sort of nice to haves. And when I was, in the venture capital business, in the private equity business, we invested in a couple companies that were providing enterprise level software. They were selling enterprise level software to large companies. And the software they were selling was very critical to that large company. Meaning, if the software didn't work, something important was going to be broken or not working inside that company. So the decision makers are really risk adverse, right? Because the worst thing you can do, or the quickest way to get fired, is to switch from supplier A to supplier B, and then supplier B doesn't deliver, or the product's not what they said it was, or whatever. Man, that's putting your job, if you're that decision maker, in high risk. So you're really risk adverse to that. So you have to really instill that confidence, and your product needs to be really, really a lot better to get someone to take that risk. And it's similar in, you and I, just before we turned on the recorder here, you and I were talking about electric cars, right? And switching from a gas-powered car to an electric-powered car, right? So there's this sort of hesitation and risk. I'm going down this new path. So make it a lot better than my electric or my current gas car, and then you can incentivize me to switch. So I thought that was really, really important point that came out. Most of the times, new products that entrepreneurs think of and introduce are really not 10 times better than existing products. And I think that's to me was the major takeaway. What did you think, Mike?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, Bela. And I like the fact that Laure integrated cognitive or brain science into his analysis of this. These are things that I think both of us have talked about over the years on this podcast, and we both taught a lot of these concepts to our students. But I really like the way Laure brought into this idea of how your brain works to make it work. And even more specifically, I want to kind of give a shout out to two more of Laure's ideas as really important points for people who are listening who might be new to the innovation or entrepreneurship game. And that's this idea of validation and a related concept of low fidelity prototyping. And I think listeners know I teach a couple courses in innovation and entrepreneurship, and it really is a big challenge to get students in their mid-20s to wrap their arms around just what you're talking about, kind of the challenges of bringing a new product into the market, to not be in love with your own product and to not see the flaws in what you're doing, and to kind of take this really limited, narrow view of the market. So I guess, validation is a huge challenge. And this idea that negative feedback early is important and you have to seek it out is really hard. People don't like to get bad news, right? People don't like this idea of being critical. And Germany is a whole interesting, different story here, because in Germany, people are very direct with their feedback, and giving critical feedback is super common. But in the US, and I know most of the listeners of this podcast are in the US, it's not done to give critical or negative feedback, or it's rude, right? So it's interesting. So I love how Laure, he laid this out in his book. It's this idea that the reason why is the way our brains are wired. And once you start to understand how our brains are wired, you understand why this idea of real good validation is important, of really getting not your friends or family, but people who you think are in the target market to give you feedback, and to encourage negative feedback. And you're not trying to sell them on it. You're not trying to convince these people how great your product is and why they should buy it. You're trying to get them to give you honest feedback on how you can improve it, so it will sell. So this is really cool. And then this idea of low fidelity paper prototyping, this idea of having a cheap and easy prototype, and people are like, and I do this with my students every semester, and I bring in armloads of cardboard and tape and string and glue and styrofoam, and it looks like you just dumped out my recycling bin right on the table. And I get them to build in an hour, right? A cool, semi-functional, to scale kind of prototype. And then we find other students to kind of test these on, right? To get them some feedback. And it's fast. You get great insights for just an hour of investment, and literally not spending a dime, right, on supplies. So this idea of getting fast feedback on a rough and ready prototype, I think, is really critical. And you can do this with a product. You can do this with a service. There's all kinds of cool ways you can actually do a rough prototype of a service. If you want to change how people interact with a receptionist at a doctor's office, there's tools you can use to do fast prototyping of that with paper, with cutouts, right? So these are all really, really cool. It seems ridiculous, but it's amazing. So I thought this was a great guest and a great interview. Those were kind of my thoughts. Any final thoughts on your side?
Yeah, the thing I'll add to that, Mike, you're talking about doing these things with students, and sort of this, discovery and low fidelity prototyping, or minimum viable product. That's a term that's sometimes used, and validation. I understand that, okay, students may not be aware of that, and you're teaching them, so this is fabulous. But it's remarkable how many entrepreneurs do not do those things. People who are coming to a venture capitalist and asking them for $5 million, and you say, well, okay, so who have you shown your idea to? Well, I can't show it to anybody because it's top secret. Well, no, right? Or, have you made a prototype yet? No, right? And the ones that walk into the investor's office, and they bring a working prototype with them, and they bring data that says, look, we've shown this to 100 people, and that's not my mom and my dad and my uncle, but, random people on the street, or random people wherever. And here's the feedback we've gotten, and we've analyzed the feedback, and here's the changes we've made as a result of that feedback. That gives you a lot of confidence that you're going to have a successful business. So I think your points were spot on there as well, Mike. So what do you think? Time to call it a day?
Yeah, let's wrap it up. So listeners, thanks for joining us today. We hope you found the episode interesting and thought-provoking as we did. And as always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com. And
please hit that follow button on your podcasting app, or leave us a review. Reviews help other people find this podcast. So we always appreciate that as well. So signing off from snowy upstate New York. See you all soon.
Sounds great, Bela. And from over here in Münster, Germany, where the snowflakes are also flying outside my office window here. See you next time.